Steam is a shade of a marketplace, somewhere where quantity supersedes quality, where the gems in the rough are difficult to find. Patience and time are both required to find the games that aren't meant for the garbage pile, but that's what I'm here for, to take the brunt of the negative, to hopefully find something great so that you don't have to. We'll be taking a look at some of the worst reviewed games on Steam. I picked 10 games that were among the mixed, negative, and overwhelmingly negative. If you've seen this series before, then you already know that I try to give each game on the list a fair shot. I attempt to give each game an even chance to see if there's something worth finding there. I will always try to point out the positives that I see in each entry, and of course, the very negative. As always, I tried to be as fair and impartial as I could with this list. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to once again talk about bad games. Streamer Simulator is a game that was developed by, well, I don't know who it was developed by. It isn't listed on the Steam page for the game, so I can't really be sure who made this. It's always a shame when that happens because the developer of a project can give the game a lot of context. I can assume, though, that this game was made by a solo developer and it was an indie project. Streamer Simulator tries to follow in the path of many other games, ones like Game Dev Tycoon that set you up in a room and leave you to complete tasks every day on your way towards a goal. But of course, Streamer Simulator has many problems that make it fall well below the others in its genre. The only thing we can really do in this game is stream video games to our channel. At the beginning of the game, we can really only stream one game, Mind Block, which is an obvious parody of Cube World, the voxel-based ARPG developed by Pic Roma. We can unlock other games to stream as time goes on, games like K1Z1, The Witch 4, World of Cars, Day of Payment 2, Blender Man, and Wake Up Dogs, or Week Up Dogs, which I guess is supposed to be a play on Sleeping Dogs, which is kind of an odd game to include here, but okay. We can buy games at any time from the store, but that doesn't mean that our PC can really run the game, so we have to upgrade those parts to be able to play them. This is where money management comes in, and we're introduced to the gameplay loop that Streamer Simulator provides us. Every day we have a certain amount of energy that we can use to stream. 10 points of energy, and each stream requires 3 points, so we can stream 3 times a day. I don't know why it bugs me this much, but why didn't they just give us 9 energy points? At the end of every day, we still have 1 point left, and it just feels so uneven. There isn't anything else we can do with this energy, so it's just wasted. Regardless, after every stream, we'll get a certain amount of viewers, new followers, subscribers, and some donations. We'll also gain experience, which allows us to unlock skill points, upgrading the amount of those other things that we get each time we stream. This is where the biggest issue with Streamer Simulator comes in. Rent. Each week we have to pay, I think, around $500 for rent or just living expenses. This is never told to you in game, it just happens. And if you don't have the money in your account, it's an automatic game over. The game never reminds you or gives you a countdown to let you know that this day is coming every week. You just have to remember. So every week we have to at least have $500 or somewhere around there because it seems like the amount varies, but the game doesn't really tell you. We get this money, obviously, from streaming. Our main income comes from donations, which start out very low, and our other income is from subscriptions. This money comes in once per week, the day before our living expenses are taken out. In the beginning, we make very little money, so little money that we really can't even spend the money we start with because we have to make it through the first 3 or so weeks, just streaming Mind Block over and over again. We have just about enough money to buy Mind Block and then stream for 3 weeks while we get slight upgrades from our skills. The game is really unbalanced and doesn't give you enough money for living expenses and money to buy parts for the PC to upgrade it and eventually get new games. We can also buy other pieces of the PC like a microphone that give us more subscribers or things that give us more experience. It took me a good hour of just completing the same cycle over and over again, streaming Mindblock 3 times a day and going to bed before I eventually got the money to buy the second game, Blender Man. Now, this took so long that I figured Blender Man would increase my viewers a bit, make me more money, get me more subscribers, and I'd have a little breathing room. This was not true. I'm not really sure what the game itself affects, but it wasn't even noticeable to me. The amount that viewership or subscribers increased was so small that it felt like it had no effect, if there even was an effect at all. As we stream games, we also increase our level in those games, and again, I can't really even be sure what this does. It seems like we get more viewership from games that we have maxed out, but the game never explains this to us. It never really explains anything at all. After a few hours of playing this game, doing the same thing over and over again, planning for the end of the week and trying to buy some minimal PC upgrades so that I could get a new game, I realized that maybe that was the point. Maybe Streamer Simulator is a social commentary on the sacrifice and grind to become famous on the internet, the reduction into monotony of the things that you used to love. No, I'm giving this game way too much credit. There is another game that does this idea really well, and that's YouTuber's Life. I've played the first game before, but I went and played the sequel for this review just to get some footage and prove a point. The second game definitely goes off the rails a bit more and becomes a little more than just a streamer or content creator simulator, but it still does what it's trying to do very well. It's basically the same concept. We play an aspiring content creator, we can stream, make videos, do interviews. We have control almost every step of the way, from recording to setup, editing, publishing. It's a very good simulator game. It's not exactly my type of thing, as I'm not a big fan of the aesthetic, but I can recognize that it does a lot of things very well. Now, of course, YouTuber's Life is doing a lot that it seems Streamer Simulator isn't trying to do, but even something like Game Dev Tycoon is very addicting, engaging, and fun without ever leaving the office. It's incredibly simple, and judging by the design of Streamer Simulator, seems to be at least somewhat of an inspiration for it. Yet Game Dev Tycoon is firing on all cylinders, whereas Streamer Simulator is broken down on the side of the road. I wanted Streamer Simulator to at least maybe even have a job for our character to do, something that we could do to earn money outside of streaming Mindblock for 20 hours a day. We could then take this money and fund the streaming venture, being able to leave it behind once we get closer to the end. But it doesn't have anything to do other than speed through its lackluster content until eventually we close it and leave it behind. Since we're on the topic of life simulators, let's talk about Karma. Karma was developed by W&M Studio. They have 3 other games on Steam, 2 of which actually seem to have good reviews. Jump to Die and Jump to Die 2 have seemingly been at least a slight success for the team, but Karma was the first game they released on the platform. It's very similar to Streamer Simulator in that it is a life sim. The goal here is developing our skills while working, making money, and keeping our stress down. If our stress gets too high, it's game over. We have to work daily to make more money, but we also have to study new abilities. We can develop the skills to chat with people online, to get better jobs in software, or become a hacker. Studying also increases our stress, so if everything increases our stress, how do we decrease it? We can chat with other people once we get the skill, or we can buy things that will decrease our stress every day. Certain things like game consoles or beds can be used to decrease the stress meter, and will just add to a total stress decrease stat overall. These will become incredibly important as getting more high-profile jobs or studying the most difficult of skills will increase our stress a lot. It's kind of this odd balance where when we get closer to the end of the game, we're definitely finding success in the financials area, but we're struggling to keep our stress down. This is obviously a reflection of real life, but no matter what, the stress bar is going up. If we have no money and are trying to make it to the top, or if we have some money and are trying to hang on to it. The game clearly has a point it's trying to make, and you can tell by the aesthetic that there was a specific feel that the team wanted it to have. The core of the game, though, is the karma system. This is a specific tree that we can study, one which eventually results in us trying to find out what this life really means. Maybe these things are more valuable and impactful than money and success. The game is not without its problems, though. The myriad issues like misspellings in the UI, the general lack of guidance in the mechanics, which can sometimes be so frustrating that I wanted to stop playing. Trying to figure out how to unlock chat mechanics, even though it seemed like I already had, was so perplexing, and there just isn't anything in the game that tells us how to do this. Also, being able to buy like 100 beds for no reason never really made sense to me. All of the numbers don't really seem to work out. Like, I couldn't really tell if my purchases were making an impact or not. It's very odd, but I actually don't mind this game at the end of the day. It seemed like the goal here was to try and do something with this life sim genre. It was trying to elevate it into something outside of getting the number to go higher. The problem with that is that the best things about simulator games is getting the number to go higher. It's hard to ride the line between enjoyment and message or purpose, but Karma makes a damn good attempt at doing that. It just doesn't really make it all the way there. Last Epoch is a game that absolutely has no business being on this list, and that's part of why I put it on here. Last Epoch currently has recently mixed reviews for only one big reason, one that we'll get to in a moment. Before we talk about that, Last Epoch is a game that was developed by 11th Hour Games. The concept and formation of the team actually came from a Reddit post asking if anyone would like to create an ARPG. The team eventually took their idea to Kickstarter and got a lot of funding. The game then spent a really long time in early access working out bugs and kinks to try and create something unique, but also familiar. The game recently had its 1.0 release, and it's safe to say that I was really excited for it. I played this game a bit years ago in early access and played it a lot a week or so before release. The game itself is amazing. The elevator pitch that everyone uses for Last Epoch is that it's the middle ground somewhere between Diablo 4 and Path of Exile, where Diablo 4 is incredibly simple and boring, appealing far more to the casual audiences than the hardcore ones. It can get old pretty fast. Path of Exile, on the other hand, can be overly complicated with years of leagues under its belt. It can be very daunting for a new player to enter at this stage. Last Epoch lands somewhere right in the middle. The team clearly tries to exemplify the easy-to-play, difficult-to-master philosophy. The combat in Last Epoch is incredibly smooth, and there's a ton of build variety. Each class has 3 masteries, which are basically subclasses that leave you doing anything from slinging spells while wielding a sword to commanding a falcon to attack everything in sight. Skills can be specialized, and they have their own skill trees with tons of different paths to go down. Each class and mastery also have their own passive trees, but none of this is ever really overwhelming. This isn't one of those games that requires you to find a build online before you start. You really can make your own way. It's also very balanced, so there aren't a ton of these options that just make you feel like you made the wrong choice. Even if you did make the wrong choice, the game makes it very easy to respec and change where your points go. Once you reach endgame, you are put into an infinite map system called monoliths. Here you can actually target farm gear. This feels almost better than any other ARPG that I've played. Being able to pick and choose the rewards that you get from completing endgame content is awesome. Add on top of this the engaging and unique crafting system that lets you remove and add affixes to your gear, and you have an ecosystem that doesn't completely rely on RNG. Of course, we still have to get lucky to find the gear in the first place, or even to get the modifiers that we want, but at the end of the day, giving the player that little extra ounce of control makes the whole thing feel a lot better. Last Epoch has the variety, it has the systems, and honestly with a few more updates when the team adds some more complex features into the game, I think it could be really great. It could honestly compete with the big boys, and it definitely has its path laid out for it. So why, at the end of the day, is this game listed here, and why does it have mixed reviews? Well, first of all, I just want to say most people in the community share my opinion on this game, but the 1.0 launch wasn't that smooth. There were a ton of server issues for days. If you could get into town, you'd likely get stuck because the zone servers were trying to handshake handshake with the town servers or something. I don't know, I'm not a back-end dev. But regardless, if you were in town, you got stuck in town. If you were outside, you got stuck outside. Obviously, the team had prepared for a big launch. There was a lot of hype around Last Epoch before its 1.0 release. The game reached about 150k players on its first day, where its previous max was somewhere around 40k. But clearly, something happened that they weren't expecting. Now, here's where I come to Last Epoch's defense a little bit. In my opinion, I expect any sort of ARPG launch to not go smoothly. Diablo has had terrible launches in the past. Path of Exile has had terrible launches in the past. It just happens. If Blizzard, with their millions of dollars of funding, can't seem to get it perfect, why would a team of 80 people be able to? Of course, this is no excuse, but there at least has to be a little leeway given here. This is also EHG's first game launch. They've never even released another project before, so as far as terrible launches go, it really hasn't been that bad. Not to mention the fact that the game has a full offline version so that people could still play the entire time that the servers were having issues if they wanted to. Also, the game is only $35, and we live in a world where $70 games are expected to be broken on launch. Now, the other side of that should be stated as well. Buying a new game and not being able to play can be very frustrating, especially in the modern day when we usually just click a button and get what we want immediately. Being told to wait a little bit just doesn't really compute with most people. Now, I didn't have that many server issues on the first day. I kind of brute forced my way through the beginning areas and it just kind of worked for me. I ended up beating the campaign on the first day of launch, and once you're in the endgame monoliths, you don't have to go back to town, so you don't really run into those issues. Get good, kid. But I can understand how frustrating it must be to get stuck in the starting areas for hours. So this is why the game is currently sitting at mixed, because a new audience came in and felt scammed because the servers were having issues. Again, I do get it. I understand the frustration, but also I don't think Last Epoch deserves a negative rating because the game on its own is just so good. I don't think server issues push it out of being a good game. In short, you should go play Last Epoch, and thank you for letting me rant about Last Epoch. Dark Astral is a game made by Vidani, a developer with a ton of different games on Steam, most with negative reviews. Now, most of the games are priced really low, all of them being just 99 cents, but this wasn't always true. I bought Dark Astral at its previous price, which was $60, and you'll see why that's egregious shortly. Dark Astral is a side-scroller. We run from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, either avoiding or killing the enemies in front of us. But that's literally it. First of all, we can't touch enemies at all or we take damage. If we jump on their heads, they will die, but we still get hurt, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. The main way we can kill enemies is with our weapon or with magic. We don't get nearly enough mana to kill any enemies, so it's not really a viable option all the time. The weapon is alright, but we have to pick it up at the beginning of every level, and it's just not in some levels. Why not just have this be a permanent thing rather than having to pick up our weapon at the start of each level? Also, the game just really looks terrible. There was no thought put into color or design. Half of the enemies blend in with the background, which the thin black border around their shapes does help with a little bit, but not nearly enough. I played this game for a while, and eventually I just lost track of how many levels I had completed. I thought that at some point a new enemy would be introduced, or a new level type, or I'd reach a new act or chapter, but that just never happened. The game just kept going, and there isn't anything here. Not that there was anything there to begin with. The big reason that I put this game on the list was the price point. Apparently the game was originally priced at $8 and then the dev hiked it up to $60, maybe hoping to confuse some people and trick them into buying it. I'm not sure. Regardless, this game is clearly not worth $60. Even Suicide Squad isn't worth that much, and somehow this game is not as good as Suicide Squad. Luckily, the price has now been lowered, maybe because the dev realized they weren't getting many trick sales and people can just refund the game if they'd like anyways. I got scammed. Cobra Kai 2 Dojos Rising was developed by Flux Games and was obviously based on the television show of the same name. I don't know much about that show, and I was not about to watch it for this review, so I can't really say whether it lives up to that show or not. But one thing worth noting before we move on is that the game was published by Game Mill Entertainment. If you've watched this series, then you're probably quite familiar with that publisher by now. They appear quite a lot on these lists and have developed a bit of a reputation. They really live up to their name as they churn out a variety of licensed projects just about non-stop. They've been behind games like Skull Island Rise of Kong, Nerf Legends, and Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. Cobra Kai 2 is a beat-em-up, plain and simple. At the beginning of the tale, we get to pick one of the 3 dojos in the game, and our goal is to build it back up, recruiting new kids from all over town to come train with us. Each level sees us running around and beating up bad guys before we eventually have to fight a few bosses and recruit a few people to our team. Each character has their own specialties, their own skills. Each of the directions on the D-pad will match up with a specific skill, all of which we can switch out for new ones. Defeating enemies gives us experience, and we can use this experience to advance each character's skill tree. We can also recruit and equip various helpers that will level up the dojo or increase its capabilities. If I could say one good thing about this game, it's that it's got a lot of variety in systems and mechanics, especially for a game like this. I didn't expect much going in, and maybe that led to me giving this game a little bit too much credit, but it wasn't all bad. The combat is definitely a little clunky. There's a lot here to be desired. Fighting isn't exactly fluid, and it never really feels good to be in combat. If I could relate it to one thing, it reminds me of playing a PS3 game that I downloaded from the PlayStation Store. I say this a lot, but it really did feel like a bargain bin game. The biggest issue with Cobra Kai 2 is that it just has so many bugs. It was so janky, at most points feeling like it was held together with duct tape and super glue. Menus and systems would often break, leaving me unable to see what I was upgrading or trying to do. I would get stuck while fighting, or enemies would get stuck while fighting. Stuff just constantly broke, and I actually probably would have beaten the entire game if it didn't crash so often. There's also some platforming sections in later levels, and the game just really isn't polished enough to make these mandatory. It took me forever of trying over and over again to be able to land consecutive wall runs over a gap. It's just so damn clunky, and when there's challenge, it isn't because the game has decided to be challenging, but because something has broken behind the scenes, and it just isn't working as intended. The big issue with this game, again, is price. Cobra Kai 2 totals in at $50, and this is definitely a $20 project at best. If the game didn't crash so often, I probably could have beaten it in a few hours or so. It definitely wasn't long, and unless you consider repeating beat-em-up levels over and over a breadth of content, then this game really isn't worth it. I do think it is slightly, and I say slightly with heavy intent, better than other Game Mill projects that I've played. But at the end of the day, it's a pointless distinction because this game, like those others, was only made to cash in on the trend of this incredibly popular Netflix show, and what's left behind is just another mediocre game. The Visitor is a horror game developed by Raining Glass Studios. It is seemingly the only game that they have ever released. The game puts us in the shoes of a character who has taken some time away at a cabin to finish their novel. Our goal here is to write as much as we can and get each chapter done, but at the same time, ghastly ghouls and ghosts are trying to scare us to death. We can sit down at our laptop to write, which we do by just mashing keys on the keyboard, but we have to pay attention to audio cues and sounds behind us to stop writing and check our surroundings. If we don't, then we're killed by the monster in the house. This is the sort of cycle of the game. It ends up being like a much more simplified welcome to the game. Our work is done by interfacing with the computer, but we can't stay on it too long, and the horror comes from the anticipation of death or being scared rather than outright scares. Of course, we'll have to do little tasks around the house in between writing the novel. Now, I think the idea of this overall kind of works. There's a reason that something like Welcome to the Game succeeds. There's a sort of primal fear that we have of what we can't see, checking over your shoulder to make sure that nothing is behind us, the sounds of footsteps just beyond your back, the fear that something is lurking in your footsteps. This is a fear that nearly everyone has, and playing on that fear works very well, constantly forcing the player to check for something that is about to attack them creates an air of tension. Now, the thing about the Visitor is that it just doesn't really make the audio cues clear enough. This forces us to just check every time we hear something, which sure could make the game scarier, but really just confuses the player. The other problem with this game is that it's very generic. The game's assets don't exactly look unique, and nothing here screams handmade. I'm not sure if the developer actually put painstaking time into making each of these items, or if they were just ripped from an asset store, but it sure feels like the latter. There's also the fact that the Visitor just really isn't doing anything new. It's taking other concepts and making them much smaller in scale. This should theoretically make the project more focused and allow the developer to hammer into these ideas, perfecting them. But the game just really feels boring. The loop gets tired after the first couple of times, and there really isn't a lot else here for us to engage with. On top of that, the game is really buggy and has all kinds of technical issues. Even if it worked perfectly though, I still wouldn't recommend it just based off of the fact that it's so bland. Sure, there are unique ideas here, but most of them feel pulled from other sources. The Visitor doesn't do a lot. Full stop. Fobia is a game that I won't talk about for too long because I literally couldn't progress in it. Fobia was developed by Taptique, yet again a developer that seemingly only ever made one project. Fobia is very much like Limbo or something in that vein. We run from the left side of the screen towards the right and solve small puzzles along the way. Right out of the gate, Fobia looks wonderful. They've done a fantastic job at choosing colors that stand out. The game actually looks very unique and creates its own sort of image, imprinting it in your mind so that you remember it. The art design overall is pretty good, clearly going for a more minimalist style, no frills, no fluff. That's fine for me and actually works well for indie games, especially when developers don't have a ton of projects under their belt. Trying to go for realism over style doesn't really work out in that case, and most first projects are much better served by going simple rather than complex. The little falling red leaves in the foreground or above us really serve to set the tone, and they stick out just a little bit from the purposefully dull background and environment. There's just a little bit of flair here, a little bit of style that I really enjoy. The art also conveys kind of a peaceful atmosphere, which is in direct juxtaposition to the dangerous environments that we'll be encountering. At the end of the day, Fobia is about getting to the right. We will have to solve puzzles to progress. Simple ones like pushing a tree down to cross over a gap or pushing a box onto a teeter-totter. But the problem with Fobia comes in when we start talking about anything technical or really anything that makes it a game. First of all, most of the puzzles barely work. Getting the log to fall on the gap doesn't really work half the time. The other half of the time we might hit the jump perfectly, but the log falls in a strange way, and this is just talking about the puzzles that do actually work. My time with Fobia was pretty short-lived because I eventually encountered a puzzle that I just absolutely couldn't get past. I'm really not sure if I did something wrong, but most people on the discussion boards had the same problem. You just actually can't get past this spinning spiked wheel. Maybe I'm just really dumb, but I really couldn't figure it out. Regardless, if it isn't broken, then the design of the puzzle just is not intuitive. There's nothing here to guide the player to progress or move forward. Pushing the player in the right direction without being overbearing is a fine line to ride, but this game doesn't seem to attempt to do it at all. On top of that, I'm pretty sure it's just broken. It's a shame because I did enjoy the aesthetic, not saying that it's incredibly unique or some masterpiece, but it is something that the game does well in my opinion, and I like to give these projects flowers when they deserve it. Also, a lot of the games that I play for this series end up being duds. They can be terrible at times with almost no redeeming qualities. I am often grasping for anything good to say. So when I see something that I do genuinely like, I get really excited. Other than that though, Fobia is actually unplayable. Literally. Galactic Bowling was developed by Perpetual FX Creative, which is probably one of the worst names that I think I've ever heard from a studio. They developed 2 other games, Alien Monster Bowling League and Top Hand Rodeo Tour. One of those was for the Microsoft Kinect. Can you guess which one? The game itself is obviously about bowling, and it does have a story, but what is it about? I honestly couldn't tell you. A bowling tournament for the fate of humanity or something? A dark queen harvesting human souls with a massive ship? It's kind of insane, actually. But regardless, we have to bowl. We have our choice of a few characters, and they're definitely drawn in that 2000s Mad Magazine style where every feature is overly exaggerated. We can choose from Max Fortner, Shaniqua Stevens, John Dyer, and Kendra Klein. Of course, the actual game is really just bowling. We have some extra abilities that we can use to mess with the opponent or to give us an advantage, but at the end of the day, this is just bowling on the PC. These types of games were a really big hit when getting games on the computer wasn't that easy, and you were marketing your product to people who only had solitaire as an alternative. There are some problems with the game, like the fact that we can kind of just throw the ball in the same way every time and just get strikes over and over, but that really doesn't even focus on the fact that this game is just a product of a wildly different time, a time where there were 2 camps of PC gamers, ones that were incredibly nerdy on the fringe of society, and ones that were just passing time when they should be working. Galactic Bowling was meant for a different crowd. It was meant to be tantalizing and to appeal to the audience that wasn't playing World of Warcraft or Quake. There really just isn't a lot here that you probably couldn't get with any other bowling game, and at this point, all of those games are probably online. You can play with friends, randoms online. There is probably strategy involved, whereas Galactic Bowling is just a dust-covered relic of the past. I definitely didn't hate playing it, and there wasn't anything particularly broken about it. It's just not really necessary today. MMA Simulator is a game that, just by the title, should be out for my heart. If you weren't aware, I am a massive MMA fan. It's actually kind of the only other thing that I do with my free time. If I'm not playing and writing about video games, I'm watching or practicing MMA. So when I saw MMA Simulator pop up on the list, I knew that I had to check it out. MMA Simulator was made by Zever Games. They've only released one other game, Wager, which is a roguelite game played on Windows XP. I haven't played a ton of these sports simulator games, so I don't really have a ton to compare this game to, honestly. That being said, the game itself sees us managing a stable of fighters that we have signed to our gym. We can train them in specific areas. If we think they're really weak in grappling, then we can focus on that. If they need to get better at striking, then we can hammer that in. If fighters are overtrained, we can even let them rest. We can hire better coaches or send our current coaches out to be trained. This will up their stats and make them more effective at improving fighters. The fighters themselves can also spar, but this does open them up to the possibility of injury. We can expand our gym and add more training equipment, more places for fighters to train, etc. With all of these fighters, we will eventually be invited to take part in an event. Our fighters will be added to different matchups and placed against each other. We can then simulate the event and watch them win or lose. We obviously get prize money for wins and can funnel that back into the business to improve our facilities. Now, this isn't exactly the worst game I've ever played, but it's also not a game that I would ever play in the first place. Sports simulators, like I've said, aren't really my thing. I don't get a lot from managing a screen of names and numbers. It just doesn't really appeal to me, but I can understand that these sort of games would thrive off of complexity. They would do very well to have a ton of customization at their disposal. This is where this game seems to lack. Most of the reviews for the game point this out as well. The project just doesn't seem to have that much customization on hand. The other massive downside to the game is that there is no tutorial. There is a guide that the game suggests that we use, but it's an external web page that we have to visit. Having to go to a different site to even be able to figure out how to play the game is a big issue. It wasn't really that difficult to figure out once I got things going, but you should be able to do everything from within the program itself. The game overall just really didn't grab me, and I'll be honest, I can't really tell whether that was because the game didn't have enough features or because this genre isn't exactly my forte. I do know that a lot of the reviews reported bugs as being the main issue, but I didn't really see any of those. Also, the long load times that were pointed out many times didn't really seem to be present anymore. I can't really come to a definitive conclusion on MMA Simulator other than the fact that I didn't really want to play it beyond a couple of hours. Project Z, The Beginning of the End, Chapter 1, and yes, that's exactly how it's typed on Steam, is wildly unfinished. I was actually kind of excited to try this game out, especially because it billed itself as a tower defense game. I used to love tower defense games when I was younger. They were my bread and butter. I played a ton of them, and it's a genre that I haven't really gone back to in years. When I saw this game, I was ready to revisit some memories, but Project Z really just doesn't live up to the hype, or at least the hype that I had. First of all, the game just doesn't work. Our goal here is to protect a settlement from the invading zombies. We can do this by placing some traps, barriers, fire pits, whatever we have access to at the time. The problem is none of these traps can be placed effectively. Half the time they just won't go into the spots that we try to put them in. Other times the spots that we can place them in are just grayed out. We can walk around and pick up money that will allow us to buy more defenses, but it's incredibly easy to just get stuck and never be able to get out again. We can also attack the enemy with just our weapon, but we are way too weak to actually take on more than 1 or 2 zombies at once. The traps that are available from the beginning of the game aren't helpful enough to actually kill the zombies that are invading. We just end up getting steamrolled over and over. This is again only if we can actually get this far in the game. Most of the time this game just crashes, or we get stuck somewhere, or one of the NPCs gets bugged out. It's just a massive mess overall. Even the stamina bar would get bugged out and just not recover, leaving me in a slowed state the entire time. I would end up running around in slow motion, trying to get away from the approaching horde, but would eventually die and restart. Project Z really is nothing. That's it, just nothing. It's just a broken Steam game. It was really disappointing because I did want to play a tower defense game that actually had at least some working systems. That was part of the reason that I tried to get the game to work for so long. I actually wanted to play it, but I just couldn't get it to properly fulfill its duties. In the end, I left this game wanting more, but definitely not more of what it had, more of what it was trying to say it had. I guess that this wasn't the beginning of the end, it was definitely the end, and we'll never see a Chapter 2 or 3 or 4 of Project Z, The Beginning of the End, Chapter 1. With that, we've gone through another 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. Did we find much success? Not really, but eventually we'll find that misunderstood diamond in the rough, I promise. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I also just want to shout out my patrons who are massive supporters of my channel. You guys are the best. I am currently very hard at work on the Witcher 3 video, which is just an unmanageable beast at this point, but we're getting there. I also want to point out that I started a podcast with Evan Prince a few weeks ago called TGG. The link to that is down in the description. Each week we stream the show live and talk with your favorite creators about games, movies, and whatever else comes up. Be sure to check it out. Thanks again for watching the video. See you next time. Bye, Dad.